There we go. Thank you, Macintosh. So I'm going to start out with a story about a project that I did a number of years ago. And this project was for a major retailer who wanted to expand their operations into Japan. And so they sent a team of us to Osaka, which was really interesting. They didn't want Tokyo, they wanted kind of a more representative Japanese city. So they sent us to Osaka. And while we were there, oh good, no, this isn't working either. While we were there, we visited places like the Umeda Marketplace, and we looked at how merchandise was displayed. We looked at the signage. We looked at how people moved about the stores. We looked at, how things were shown to customers. We went to places like Denden Town on Nipponbashi, and this is a place where they have a lot of all sorts of consumer electronics that they kind of display in these kind of long alleys that they show. And you can actually kind of walk down and sort of compare very side by side, hey, this looks like this, looks like that, but in this kind of outdoor marketplace, really fascinating. We talked to people in their homes. We went to this series of places at the Gunkan apartments, where we went and actually talked to people in these really interesting in their little houses up here. And then we talked kind of these on-the-street interviews where we actually kind of just went up to people as they were like eating like these two girls were doing, and just kind of talked to them about their shopping habits and kind of what they did, how they did it, what they did while they were shopping, after they shopped, before they shopped, all those kinds of kind of nuancy things. We looked at signage and iconography. This was a place where the store, they closed the grate at night. And so a lot of the stores had these very kind of vivid iconography and vivid signs. So that all became kind of part of what we absorbed while we were there. We saw some really interesting different cultural observations. We saw a lot of people, in the middle of these stores just simply start to crouch down wherever they were. It doesn't matter, where they were. They just had bags and they just sat down kind of wherever. It was a really interesting look at kind of personal space and how it was, just being appropriated by different people. We of course did kind of cultural norms. We looked, we went to a sumo match, and we went to the ball game there, and those kinds of things as well. I came up with a set of design principles. So using colorful iconography to really, attract and comfort customers, kind of mixing the street and the store. The street and the store in Japan aren't quite as dissimilar as they are here in the United States. And then things about display space, about how the display should really bring to this idea of kind of an open market and how that works, bring that kind of feel into a retail store. But that's just your first lesson. All the images you just saw, I just collected them off Flickr from my house. I've never even been to Japan. So, voila, I saved myself a trip to Osaka. So, my name is Dan Saffer. And this is how to lie with design research. So that's really your first tip. Don't go into the field unless you really have to. I mean, why do research when you don't really need to? Most corporations, most clients are just, looking to have their ideas validated anyway. So, why not give them what they're looking for simply by, choosing photos and stories off the internet? Don't bother going out to the field, it's too hard. So the next tip is, these kind of wacky practices that they always impress clients. That kid on the floor with the bags, I don't know what he was doing, but it made a really good story, didn't it? It made it seem like we were really there. Especially for international research, if you throw in a couple of these unexpected cultural practices, it makes the clients feel like you've really taken the time to go do it. And consider these very sort of diverse practices. But let's actually we should back up for a minute here. So I don't really recommend this method, which I kind of call the Jason Blair method, which is named, after the New York Times reporter who pretty much faked all his news stories. And he did all his kind of reporting from his apartment in Brooklyn, the same way that I did all my soccer research from my apartment in San Francisco. But I don't recommend this method because, it's very easy to disprove it. Like Mr. Blair, you're eventually going to get caught. There are better, although probably not easier ways to lie with research. And a really good lie is one that's untraceable and one that can't be pinned on you very easily. So, but first, I do want to say that I know the reason why we're all here. I know why you all came to this very fine conference with such fantastic speakers like myself. It's really a privilege for all of you, I'm sure. But I'm sure that even though that you sold your boss or your school that you were here to help users or make better products or user experience, whatever that means, it's really all about the money, right? You can admit it. It's all about the money. You came because you wanted to jump on the design research bandwagon before it's pulled out, and we were found out and it rolls away. So I'm really here to help you do that. Lying makes it easier to cash in. We got paid $500 grand for that Osaka project. Now some of you may be saying to yourself, but Dan, why would anyone ever lie about research? I'm going to tell you this. People lie about design research for the same reason that people design. People lie about design research for the same reason people design. To turn an undesirable situation into a more desirable situation. I've got an idea that I want you to act on. Or I don't want to be uncomfortable or embarrassed or feel stupid. Or I want you to think that I'm really smart. All these things are an uncomfortable situation or a bad situation that I want to make better. And I do it by lying. And here's why most designers lie. So suppose I've got this cool idea for a lamp. And a client comes to me and says, let's build a lamp. And I say, well, I want to build this really cool hypnotic lamp that hypnotizes people as they sit at their desk and they become mesmerized by it. Well, that sounds a little weird, but if I could get users to say that they would like to be hypnotized at their desk, then hey, that's not really lying, is it? I mean, it's distorting a little bit, but Dan, I bet you're saying, Dan, how might I go about doing that? And let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that you have a good reason for lying. So let's move on. Rule number 2, how to lie with design research. In design research, your data is really only as good as your participants. So you're going to want to choose subjects that are going to bolster your case. The smaller and more like all the research subjects are, the better. So you're going to want to research people who aren't diverse. Diversity is overrated when you're stacking the deck in your favor. So if you're making a website about, auto parts or for an auto manufacturer, why not interview people that are all auto enthusiasts? Because then you can say without lying, well, everyone we talk to spends hours looking at car sites online, And you get bonus points if you can call this undiverse group an unfocused group. Here's another tip. Make an unconscious bias, which we all do, conscious. We do this anyway. So if we have two research subjects to choose from, we're going to choose the one that is, unconsciously of course, we're going to choose the one that seems to be more cooperative and maybe better dressed and maybe, has enough money and, we're going to choose the people who surprisingly look a lot like us and who are a lot like us. So if we're going to talk to different people, why in the world would we want to even talk to different people who are different than us? You have to ask yourself, what would Johnny do? What would the late defense attorney Johnny Cochran do? You want to pick your research subject like Johnny picked juries. You want the right mix of people that are going to give you the outcome that you want. You don't want any wild cards. You don't want subjects that are going to give you results out of left field. You want the subjects that are going to parrot back your ideas and your stories. To do this, of course, is rule number 3. You can't be objective. So we need to just leave the objectivity to scientists and reporters. We're designers, we're researchers. Why is there this veneer that we need to be objective in our research? We're not out there in lab coats like some pinhead trying to discover a new form of bacteria. Who's lying to who now? You're going to want to ask leading questions. So if we're not objective, we can ask these leading questions, right? So you can say, my concept really great or just great? So then you can put in all your research reports. Everyone we talked to thought that this concept was really great. It's not lying if the subject said it, is it? So you're going to use carefully considered wording to lead. Wasn't that a confusing experience? Isn't this a great conference? You got to remember that your research subjects are people that are in this unfamiliar situation. They're being interviewed, they're being observed. They want to give you what you want anyway, and they're looking for cues from you to for you to tell them what to do. So you can easily influence their responses by the phrasing of your questions. If you can't do that, it's rule number 4. Toss out any data that you don't like. Don't let a research subject ruin your design idea. When it comes time to analyze the data, what you're essentially doing is culling the data, right? You're separating the wheat from the chaff. And you have to use some criteria to make those calls. And some people use things like prevalence or uniqueness. Why not just use your own preferences, right? Don't make the mistake of letting rigor or some quest for objectivity keep you from data with implications that you don't want to deal with. So here's a tip. Having data doesn't mean that you need to use it. Why do you need to use all of it? I mean, if you didn't ask that question, then they wouldn't have given you that response. And if you weren't sitting there observing, you wouldn't have seen that bit of data anyway, right? Just because something is known doesn't mean we have to use it. Donald Rumsfeld puts this really well. So, as we know, there are known knowns. There are the things we know, right? We also know there are the known unknowns. That's to say that there are some things we do not know. But there are also the unknown unknowns. Those are the ones that we don't know that we don't know. So all you need to do in your research report is to turn a known known into a known unknown. And it's very simple. One way, of course, to avoid having to toss out data at all is to never observe it at all, or at least not write it down. Only look in the places where you think you're going to get the data that you want. Rule number 5. You're going to deliberately misrepresent the data. So once you have your data from one place or another, eventually you're going to have to present it. And it's here that really the best lies can all be told in the name of storytelling. Your charts and your graphs and all these other visualizations are all just ways of telling a story about the data that was collected. But you need to make sure that it's your story, not the story of the subjects or the story of the data. I mean, look at this graph. So, interest in this new feature that you wanted, that you really wanted to add, went up 5% over a year. Okay, yes, it's very informative, but perhaps it's too informative. So different approaches are going to allow you to highlight different aspects of the data. Never miss an opportunity to emphasize how you were right and suppress the data that was wrong. So look at this, huh? Once you chop off the top and the bottom and those pesky numbers, now we're talking. This looks a lot better, right? So the old saying that a difference is only a difference if it makes a difference, that doesn't mean anything to me. And you got to bring the zazz. This is a graph showing why people join record clubs. So it has a little more zazz to it, right? It's got that nice graphic. It's colorful and fun. So if you make your charts more like this, well, you're going to pull attention away from the actual data, and you want that. You can spin it however you want. As designers, we're great at this. So you got to prove your points of making the data appear meaningful, even if it isn't. So look at this. Look, this is a really cool diagram. But what does it mean? Who cares? It's cool looking. We're good at making pretty things. Let's make some pretty. The more specific the number you quote is, the more people think it must be correct. Anyone know what this number is? Anyone? Does this help? This is the exact amount, down to the dollar, that Jacob Nielsen said the whole world would save by implementing his usability recommendations. I'm surprised he didn't put cents in there. Most businesses can't get their budgets down to dollars, but here he does it for the entire world. That is just masterful. My hat is off to you, sir. Here's another one from the master. This is from his article about how everyone should write essays and not blogs. It's a very, very insightful, it's a must read. I found it on a blog. But he says that bloggers on the left, over there, are bozos. Those on the right, very clever. Hey, wow, he must be reading my blog. Trend lines going up make for a very good drama and very good graph. So if you can show that everything is moving up, 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 you'll make your plans feel better, and you'll probably get a lot more work out of it too. So it doesn't matter if you can really prove it, because this is all the future over here, and it's the future. You know, no one knows what's going to happen. It might go up. So here's rule number 6. Willfully confuse correlation and cause. Just because something happens in a sequence or is connected doesn't mean that the one thing causes the other. It might be a coincidence. But coincidences don't make for very good research presentations, do they? So, if there are several reasonable explanations for a phenomenon, simply pick the one that you like the most. So here's a tip. With a small enough sample size, correlations are easy. So, you know, you can make a correlation for just about anything with a small enough sample size. So in this case, more cars that are blue get hit by rocks every year. I've got data. I can prove it. There it is. It's a small, it's enough sample size. You can do it. Rule number 7, deliberately misinterpret the data. So, as anyone who's ever analyzed data research knows, you can take the exact same data and draw from it multiple conclusions. Different people can look at the same set of data and draw from it multiple conclusions. So, this can be true even for quantitative research, but even more so for the qualitative research that most of us usually do. So you look at this image that was taken on a research trip. One person could look at this and say, wow, you know, the subway really cares about their users, and you know, this is a really helpful sign for them. And, you know, it's good that they recognize there was a problem and they put out this sign. Very nice. Someone else could look at this and say, wow, you know, there's only 2 trips from this platform? Why is the subway so poorly marked that they need to put up these signs? You know, it all depends on how you want to spin the information. And that just depends on what the outcome you want of your research to be. So you can make unlike things seem alike by comparison. So clearly, Chicago and Iraq aren't quite the same thing. But by comparing apples to oranges, I can get you to believe that they are and skew the data at the same time. It's a twofer. Oh, and I made these figures up, don't bother trying. If you divorce words from their context, they're ripe for misinterpretation. There's a big difference between this woman saying, I really love using this product, and this woman saying, I really love using this product. But on paper, there's no difference, right? You can say, customers said they love using this product. Language is really great for distorting data. Really great for lying. So, note the subtle difference between this, the subject said this task is difficult, and this. The subject said the task is nearly impossible. It makes it so much more impactful, doesn't it? And it's not quite wrong either, is it? The last rule is number 8. To answer questions that you haven't been asked. So, often when you go out in the field, if you bother to do that, you're likely to bump into something that's really interesting, but it's totally unrelated to your business problem. When that happens, simply change the scope of the research that you're doing. You know, if you can't find what you're looking for, if you change the scope, then you might just find what you're going to need. If you can make it prove the other thing that you were looking for originally, even better. And then just call these things emergent patterns. They're emergent patterns. It's great. Don't get caught. Amateurs like James Fry get caught because their lies are too obvious and too easily disproved. So if you follow the 8 rules that I've just outlined for you, you can distort the research in your favor and you won't get caught. And if you do get caught, you can simply explain this. Hey, it's a subjective art. It's a magic phrase that's going to get you out of all kinds of trouble. And it's impossible really to argue with, right? And remember, it's always better to be a winner than to tell the truth. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how to lie with design research.